Do we start? Yes, we do. Ladies, gentlemen, it's a pleasure, a joy, and an honor to open this FSR Talks from Delhi. Which Delhi? Not the old one I visited yesterday, but the new Delhi. And I am surrounded by many Indians because we are starting from India. What do we do in India? You know that India is the biggest country in the world by population. If I simplify, 20% of humanity lives in India, and then India is the core of the future. If we think future, we have to think India. And it is even more true for us, the Europeans. We have been linked to India in the past for not so glorious reasons, but today we are linked to India for very good reason, which is we try to do things together. We try to prepare the best future for all the humans. But do we take into account, we, the Europeans, what India is, what India wants to do, what India can do? Or do we take our decisions, or do we discuss our ideas only among us, the Europeans? That's an easy question. Because we are embarked in energy transition, we would like to reach a net zero emission target someday, but which way? What is feasible for non-European? This we are not so much aware, and that's what we have to discuss and today to discover from our Indian friend. Surya Sethi is a star in India. He's well known everywhere because he had huge responsibilities. In European terms, we would say he was Director General of Energy for the government of India. He has been principal advisor for climate negotiation in the name of India. And he served under two different governments. And before this, he was Chief Investment Officer, or big boss, in the financial arm at the World Bank. So he knows what is financing, investment, and he knows what is India, of course. And Surya will open the discussion of today for about 20 minutes. After Surya, we will ask Miguel to intervene. Miguel, if we simplify, we can say he's European. If we don't simplify, he's mostly international, Latin America and Europe. Miguel has been a researcher at Front School and at Comillas University, and is today an independent expert. After Miguel, we will come back to India with Kavita. Kavita Rao is director of the National Institute of Public Finance. So she knows what is finance, what is public finance. And we will give roughly 20 minutes to Surya, 5 minutes for Miguel, and then answer by Surya, 5 minutes to Kavita, and then answer by Surya. We will see if 2 or 3 minutes are needed to understand better the answers, and then we go for the general audience, all of you, and you can ask any question. Unfortunately for Surya, in France, we say, there is no stupid question, only an answer can be stupid. We are friends now with Surya, so I can challenge him a little bit. That's it. I'm speaking from Front School Global, that we call usually FSR Global. It is a division of Front School in Delhi. It is led by Shweta Ravikumar, that you might see on the screen, with a team of researchers, young, very dynamic researchers, on the screen also, Parul Bakshi. We are starting, so Ria, you have the floor around 20 minutes.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you everyone for coming to this talk. I'll focus on funding the energy transition in low-income and low-middle-income countries. McKinsey projects a $275 trillion energy transition investment between 2021 and 2050 to deliver the 2050 net zero goal. Stanford's School of Sustainability projects the broader cost of effectively addressing climate change at $400 trillion over the same 30-year period. Slide 1, Chiara. The IMF expects global GDP rebounding to $104 trillion in 2022, led by OECD and China. Oil, gas and coal, valued at around $10 trillion, met about 81% of the global primary energy consumption in 2022. Academics in search of sustainability have propounded degrowth or a more benign evening out of consumption led by massive reductions in the rich north alongside sustainable growth in the poor south. However, truth is that inequality persists despite global GDP doubling every 25 years. Global GDP doubled between 1971 and 1994 and doubled again between 1994 and 1918. So private capital projects an additional $100 trillion global opportunity by 2043 or 2045, given the 2 pandemic years. Next slide, Chiara. I want to say that McKinsey's projections are a little more soberer than that. So they are projecting a lower GDP by 2050. Anyway, so energy, as you see in the slide, has the highest share of global GDP in these forecasts. And that underscores energy's centrality for human existence, much like air, water, and food. Next slide, Chiara. So McKinsey's net zero 2050 scenario projects an average annual outlay of $9.2 trillion for energy and land use systems. This includes $3.5 trillion of new investments and $1 trillion diverted from current high emission investments to low emission assets annually. Actual outlays will be higher in the initial 10 to 15 years because they need to be front loaded. Importantly, 73% of current investment in high emission assets continues till 2050, reflecting faith in low emission technologies. EIA and IEA project fossil shares of 69% and 60% respectively in the 2050 global energy mix. Announcing fossil era's end and banning fossil investments is a schizophrenic, holier than thou response by the banking community. Next slide, please. Developing countries and fossil fuel producers will need to spend a greater share of their GDP for energy transition. Let me go and explain the slide to you a little bit. So you see that the number at the end of each bar on the left is actually the share of total investment to total cumulative GDP of that region or that country over this 30-year period. So these are percentages. And similarly, on the right-hand column, the last column on the right, you see 3 round things. In that, it gives the cumulative share of GDP over the 30 years for each grouping, each of the 3 groupings that are shown in this slide. Now, the last group, the third group, consists only of rich and upper middle income countries, but the first 2 groups have a mix of these two countries. And the total 7.5% of the cumulative GDP over 30 years appears achievable. But the burden on the low income and low middle income countries, I will show you, is patently infeasible. Okay, so 7.5% globally as a share of the total global cumulative GDP over the 30 years seems fairly reasonable. But each individual country, when you look at it, especially when you look at the low income and low middle income countries, I will show you that that is totally infeasible. And I would like you to remember the number that is shown next to India, 10.8% of GDP. This again is average, as I said, over 30 years of cumulative GDP. Now, if you dissect these numbers further and separate out the low income and low middle income countries from this mix, you would see that at least 20% or $1.84 trillion of the annual average global outlay for energy transition must come from these poor, low middle income and low income countries. The World Bank estimates that the power sector alone would require over $1 trillion per annum by 2030 in these poor countries. This is roughly 4.2 times the 216 to 220 average total investment in the power sector in this group of countries, in this group of poor countries. To put these numbers in perspective, World Bank, which is the largest source of external funding for these poor countries, disbursed just $67 billion in fiscal year ending September 22 for all the sectors, and that included concessional funding of $25.7 billion from IDA and trust funds. Next slide, please. So this slide breaks down the energy transition investment sector-wise. And the number at the end of each bar is the actual dollar investment that would be required by each country or each group of countries. As you can see, mobility, power, buildings, and agriculture account for the lion's share of the investments. With front loading, India's $600 billion annual outlay till 2050 could translate to a requirement of up to $800 to $900 billion in the early years. That means between, let's say, during the first 10 years of the energy transition. This is 28% of India's 2022 GDP and is comparable to the total investment outlay equivalent to about 30% of GDP in all sectors in the year 2022. And now you begin to see the problem. India's total external debt as comparison is only about $620 billion. Clearly, India cannot fund this energy transition on its own. We would have to simply double our total investment, roughly double our total investment if we were to fund it on our own, and that is not going to be feasible. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide before I get into the main discussion. So here I compare the GNI of the various countries classified into various categories. So you will see that the rich and the upper middle income countries that constitute about 48% of the global population account for almost 91% of the global GNI. And the bottom 52% of the population accounts for 9.4% of the global GNI. The $1.84 trillion average annual energy transition outlay necessary for low income and low middle income with front loading would reach about 2.4 to 2.7 trillion in the initial years. This exceeds what these countries invest today in all sectors combined, and hence this energy transit investment cannot be funded by the low income and low middle income countries on their own. The rich and middle income, if you look at the responsibility, I mean, this is feasibility of funding them, but if you look at the responsibility, the rich and the upper middle income countries account for about 85% of the current emissions and 93% of the historical emissions that cause the global warming. India, the fifth largest economy of the world, accounts for 41.3% of the population, but only 36% of the GNI of the lower middle income group. India is thus well below the average per capita GNI of countries included in the lower middle income group. Actually, in 2021, India was also marginally below the average per capita income of lower middle income group and low income countries combined. So this puts in perspective how poor a country India is and why this becomes so difficult for countries such as India, which are in the lower middle income group or in the low income group in the world. Now, having said this, let's get into the main meat of the discussion. Decarbonizing power generation is recognized as the first step to net zero achievement. And this is stated by the World Bank, by McKinsey, by everybody. Now, based on its work in the power sector, the World Bank highlights additional developing country issues that constrain the achieving this goal. One, the upfront system-wide capital outlays in current renewable technologies are 5 to 7 times higher for the same level of energy service for, say, 25 plus years. Renewable projects thus typically break even in around 10 years. The much shorter time horizon of the political economy thus favors status quo. Two, conventional electricity typically costs up to 25% more in developing countries. The difference rises to 30% with decarbonization. Lack of capital, lower load density, limited transmission, distribution, and load management capacity, and the absence of competition translates to higher costs of capital, higher equipment costs, lower system flexibility, larger system losses, and higher operating costs. Three, low income and low middle income countries typically suffer from institutional and regulatory weaknesses, poor credit ratings of counterparties, and limited fiscal space to fund the social costs of fossil phase-out investments. Together, these realities raise the risk-adjusted return expectation of investors, making bankable projects hard to come by. Private capital simply cannot address these barriers. The World Bank warns that the poverty trap engenders the conventional energy trap, which in turn engenders the climate trap. The solution lies in recognizing that at current prices, the low-income and low-middle-income countries are spending well over $800 billion per annum on buying oil, gas, and coal. World Bank estimated that in 2019, these countries spent over $500 billion on oil, gas, and coal for the power sector alone. India will be spending over $300 billion on fossil fuels, including net imports of around $175 billion in fiscal year ending March 31, 2023. Even if the energy transition shifts only 40% of these fossil dollars to servicing debt and equity, financing the 1.84 trillion annual investment would become feasible. However, a fossil phase down that releases these fossil dollars is possible only if adequate and reliable clean energy materializes first. This chicken and egg problem is essentially a timing issue that can be solved with simple financial engineering. If IDA-type concessional funding can be provided with 8 to 10-year grace periods to fund investments that abate emissions in low-income and low-middle-income countries, and if grant funds address the capacity, regulatory, and institutional hurdles, then as these investments break even or come close to break even, the concessional funds can be refinanced progressively by global capital markets at competitive rates, because these mature projects would then have extremely low residual risks. The more of the initial concessional funding that can be kept off the balance sheet of the host country via multilateral guarantees that fall away upon refinancing, the greater would be the success of the proposed approach. My suggested approach could build in market and non-market based instruments foreseen under Clause 6 of the Paris Accord to benefit countries providing the initial concessional funding and grants. That would make it a win-win for everybody. A country-specific programmatic approach on the above lines will A, protect fiscal and end-user affordability, B, appropriately leverage private capital in due course, and C, embody transformational potential. Yes, the structure is based on concessional and grant funding being provided upfront. But in my defense, let me again point out that even the World Bank's limited $67 billion disbursement covering all sectors in fiscal 2022 included 38% of IDA and grant support as the catalyst. Will the rich countries controlling over 90% of the global GNI bite the bullet? Well, all I can say is that they have a moral obligation to do so under the UNFCCC framework. Philosophically, the question for mankind and the only planetary home it has is to be or not to be. I'll stop here and give it over to the discussants.
Many, many thanks, Surya. So you excellently draw the issue. And I can remember to all our European friends that we all know that energy transition is calling for many, many technologies relying on high fixed costs, which means we have to invest a lot to start producing anything. And we have to invest a lot to do only what we were doing yesterday with other technology. We are not investing to be richer. We are not investing to have more wealth to distribute among our fellow citizens. We are investing only to do the same like yesterday. Second, cost of capital. Even in EU, we say to Italy, stay quiet a little bit, or we say to Greece, stay quiet a little bit, because if we can lower the cost of capital in the EU, we will have an easier way of investing into energy transition. What do we say to countries being out of our traditional capital flows? How will they get it? And it was excellently explained by Surya, but my role is not to discuss. I'm not a discussant. I'm only the chair of the discussion. So I give immediately the floor to Miguel. Miguel, you have 5 minutes to comment, to ask questions, to make remarks.
You're not merely a discussant, you're a very intelligent person, and all your comments are very welcome. And what I would say, or I wanted to highlight, agreeing with everything the speaker said, is that okay? Let's try to think something let's say, coordinate or animate the investment in renewable. And what would be the problems? From what you say, for me, the problem is very obvious, which is that private finance has very little role in the things we need to do. And that's always seen from the revenue stream side. You need to secure the revenue stream, you need to, but there are public things, credits, warranties, etc., that can be done, that can facilitate the flow of capital to renewables. And probably that's a very important role for the World Bank, and well, I know you do that a lot, but maybe it could be done more. And I'm not sure it's about volume of capital and investment of public money and so on, because that's impossible. The amount of money that is needed for the energy transition, it's impossible to be publicly provided. So the risking projects, let's say, investing the capital in having less risk in the projects, might be an interesting strategy. I don't know. The other one is the pipeline of projects. In many countries, especially in low-income countries, the standardization of projects, having a pipeline of projects that banks can understand and invest in, probably is lacking. And that's another work that needs to be done, and probably with experts in the sector and in the banking sector even. And that's something that is necessary, because in the end, in my view, from what you say, the question is matchmaking. It's there's a need of private financing, and there's a need of a project that can be financed. And that matchmaking is, from me, what is lacking, I would say.
Surya, up to you.
Yeah.
How do you react?
Yeah, I will respond. So, I think this private capital, I've been saying this ever since I was part of the negotiations, I think is a bugbear that is a red herring in this whole debate. And let me tell you why. I'll repeat again. As I said, if you really want to do energy transition, for the same level of energy service, your investment requirements, upfront investment requirements, go up 5 to 7 times. Okay, this is not a small number. If I was to do, as I said, if India was to do its energy transition in true sense, we would need to double our annual investment outlays. And some low income and low middle income countries will need to more than double because they're not investing. We are investing around 28-30% of our GDP. Most countries are not even able to do that. So this is, how can that private, I can do this provided my GDP doubles, but my GDP, doubling my GDP may take 7-8 years. So by which time this 5 to 7 times will become even higher. Now we can keep arguing whether we can design structures which private sector will fund or will not fund. It's a separate story. But and to say that it is not about public money is not right. And I'll give you a very simple example. If you look at the COVID situation, $12 trillion were committed, 12 trillion, not billion, committed by the rich countries within 2 years. It's not that the money is not there. It's not that the public money doesn't exist. It came about because they were affected. Problem is that in the climate change, the people who are affected are not the rich country as much as the poor countries. 1 in 2 climate vulnerable people live in India. And so hence that kind of alacrity is not being seen. Just to give you another example, the Ukraine war has spent $100 billion. And for the last 15 years in the climate negotiations, we've been seeking $100 billion annually for climate change. It has not appeared. So while we can keep arguing that there is private capital will fund only projects which are feasible. And the energy transition investment take 8 to 10 years to become viable, to become feasible. So that is why I say that if somebody provides the bridge finance, nobody is asking for that free money. But if that bridge finance becomes available, yes, then we can go back to the markets and refinance it. It's easy to do that. That's not. But without that bridge finance, I don't think it's going to happen. We can keep arguing, we can keep pointing fingers. Even today, let me tell you, India is, again, it's our fault that we keep projecting how much of renewables we have done. But the renewables we have done has not taken care of all the investments that are needed to absorb those renewables into our system. And that is not going to happen by itself because that is where the problem is. You can keep on building, solar panels, but they don't add to your system capability as much as they would if you made the corresponding investment in the system requirements. So it's I think I've answered. So it is much more than matchmaking, I would say. There is a need to recognize that, look, if there is a responsibility of the rich countries to fund these requirements, and this is, as I said, a 10 to 12 year, maybe 10 to 15 year bridging requirement. And after that, yes, the capital markets can take over. The poor countries have now grown to a sufficient size to take care of these investments on their own. So it's the problem, and if you don't do it in these 10 or 15 years, I think we have already lost the boat on the 1.5 degree. Within the next 3 or 4 years, I guarantee you we will lose the boat even on the 2 degrees Celsius bound. So it's a choice somebody has to make. Yes, we will suffer more. The developing country will suffer more, but they will not go down without a fight. I can tell you that. They will drag a lot of the upper 50% with them. So maybe things will change when that starts happening. I don't know. I'm not being facetious, but I've been in this negotiations. I've been seeing for the last 30 years. We haven't achieved that private capital matching that you talk of. 30 years have gone by.
So I see that Miguel is like me. He knows well his stuff. He's a researcher since so many years.
Very handsome.
We do not know well India, and we have never thought what India is facing for real. So we are discovering, I won't say the moon, we are discovering India that I know India since I was born. It's a core of humanity, and we know India forever, but we know the name. We don't know the reality. We know only the name. India, New Delhi, we know. But it's not the case of Kavita. Of course, she's Indian, so she knows perfectly what it is about. Kavita, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
If I
Sure,
can just
thank
add
you.
one more line, Kavita, before. See,
Please.
again, because Michelle said of knowing India, as I keep pointing out, I think we, the educated ourselves, are not presenting India in its true sense. The fact that in 2021, my per capita GNI was below the average of low income and low middle income countries should tell us something about how poor this country is. Yes, we are the fifth largest, but we keep emphasizing the fifth largest economy. That means nothing. We are 18% of the global population. So I really can't, overemphasize this fact that we have a long, long way to go. Sorry, Kavita.
Not at all. So thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try and do a little bit of the devil's advocate counterposing against Mr. Sethi. I completely agree with all the numbers you've put out, and I think that's a fantastic background to build the whole narrative on. I have two small questions that keep coming into my head. One is that the cost of technology, solar panels, for instance, we've all been talking about how solar panels have gotten cheaper over the years. Perhaps other renewables are also getting cheaper with technological innovation and so on. So wouldn't developing countries feel tempted not to front load but to back load, so that we are not left with stranded assets in solar sector in addition to all stranded assets we'll have in coal, for instance? So for developing countries, I think the driver to say everybody should be doing this transition is only to ensure that the developed world actually does what it needs to do. In terms of the sheer volume of carbon emissions, I think, as your slides show, the developed world has a bigger cleaning up job, even in an annual emission story. So the trade-off is, or the reason why we are asking all the developing countries to also front load this whole process seems to come from the fact that if we don't do, the developed world also tries to argue that they don't need to do, and since we will suffer, we need to put one foot forward, and that seems to be the driver more than the most efficient way of getting there. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the same. The second question I had is, in India specifically, if we have a high population density, do we look for solar kind of renewables as the best way of doing the renewables transition, or should we be looking at more energy dense processes like nuclear power plants as a more viable way of getting there? Because like you said, trying to set up a lot of solar panels all over the countryside requires you to set up networks to extract the power from those plants, and we are still trying to figure out how to network the entire country. So should we as a country be looking at a somewhat different model, or should we really be sticking to predominantly solar wind kind of a focus for renewables? Those are my two questions.
Thanks,
Thank
Kavita.
You.
So, both your questions seem to be asking some technical things, and let me try to address them so that is clear. Again, there's a lot of misinformation about solar being a cheap. Costs have come down, but solar is still not the cheapest source of energy if you compare like to like. What is happening is people are just comparing the cost of generation at the panel with the cost of generation at conventional power plant. But if you build solar into your system, you need many other investments which we are not making and which are not accounting for. Let me illustrate this with a very potent example which we faced last summer. Last summer, this is the summer of 2022, India had an installed capacity of 410 gigawatts, okay, which included roughly, it is now 42%. That time, I think it was 38 or 39% of this installed capacity was renewable capacity. Okay. Now, because we have not made those system investments, the flexibility investments, we could not meet a peak demand of 207 gigawatts. This is unimaginable in a power system. We struggled to meet a peak demand which was half the total installed capacity. Right? Now, the reason that we failed there is because we have not made the required investments which the West has made. Let's take a parallel example of Germany, which is a system which is 1/3 our size. They've invested 1 trillion euros already, and they've achieved 40% share of renewables. Okay? And they are planning another 400 billion euros for improving the flexibility of the system to absorb those renewables. So renewables, the cost of the panels and the cost of putting up a renewable plant has come down, but the overall investment that you need for a like-to-like comparison, you could have a like-to-like comparison with battery backup. You could have a like-to-like comparison with pumped storage backup. But when you include those costs, then you realize that it is not the cheapest option. Okay. And that is the problem that we are not bringing forth. We are making political decisions purely to impress the developed world that, look, we are putting the first foot forward, so you have an obligation to do something. But in the process, we are only exposing our poor, as Mackenzie said, 1 in 2 climate vulnerable people live in my country. So we are only bargaining with their life. So that sort of answers that issue. The second one you raised about solar versus nuclear. Okay. Now, definitely nuclear is a far more dense source of power, densest source of power that exists. And yes, we've had these pipe dreams of, just to give you a sense of proportion, in the 1980s, we had projected that, in the 1960s, we had projected that India's nuclear capacity in 1980 will be 20 gigawatts, 20,000 megawatts. Okay. Today, in 2022, I'm less than 7 gigawatts. Okay. So one, nuclear is not cheap. And second, this dream that somehow we can nuclearize India into meeting our requirements is again a myth. When I wrote the integrated energy policy, it was purely political pressure that made me accept the target of 63 gigawatts on 2030. That was the only political pressure that was put on the integrated energy policy. But if anybody reads what I have written, I have said that we will not achieve 63 gigawatts of nuclear power by 2030, even by a long shot. I've said that even if I achieve 20 gigawatts by 2030, it'll be a miracle. And as I said, we are today at only less than 7 gigawatts. So nuclear, I've always argued that I still don't give up on nuclear. Maybe the world of 2100 will be a nuclear world, but trust me, we are not there yet. And the problem that I face is that we need a solution by 2030, 2035. And we don't have a solution by 2030, 35, and by which time it will already be too late.
Very good. Now, in the 14 remaining minutes, I will try to put Surya interacting with the audience. And if the audience stays short of comments, I will come back to Miguel and Kavita. We have Anna Sobchak, having asked already several questions. I will try to read them. Anna is expert at the European Commission. She's presently hosted by Florence School in Florence. Anna is saying, after South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam, India is considered the next candidate for just energy transition partnership, especially in the context of India G20 presidency. May you please share any insights on the ongoing negotiation for just energy transition seen from the Indian side? Do you think that this just energy transition is feasible? Could you tell us where we can find more information? Thank you, Anna.
Okay, Anna, I hope you can hear me. Anna, the first question, I will send the link to Chiara, and then she can share it with whoever wants. The McKinsey report is available online. If you will just Google Net Zero 2050 McKinsey, you will get that report. So it's not a secret document that only I have. It's available on the net. So that's number one. And the second, again, this just energy transition, these are, I'm an old man and I've been in this for many, many years. We keep coining these phraseologies, but when you look at the numbers, they simply do not add up. The kind of numbers that I'm talking of are unheard of. We are talking in trillions when the World Bank's total for all sectors was 67 billion. So the order of magnitude simply doesn't match. So it ends up in rhetoric and in beautiful plans. Even for example, if just to give you one example, at the Glasgow COP, there was a deal done between UK and South Africa for one plant in South Africa. Even that deal now finds that the money needed for that one plant is 3 to 4 times what that deal was promising. So it's just, we can, I don't want to disillusion you, but a lot of this talk is simply that, it's talk. Okay, and the hard reality that I can relate to you is we started, the UNFCCC came into force, I think, in 1994. The Rio Summit was in 1992. And 30 years later, our emissions, global emissions, are still rising. Despite the Kyoto Protocol, despite all the good words, our emissions are still rising, because our growth model is driven by higher consumption. So, I can't give you a better example of why these kinds of partnerships will not work unless somebody really buckles down and says, I'm going to address this problem. Just as we addressed COVID. As I said, in 2 years, $12 trillion got committed. That's the kind of money we are talking of. I'm not asking 12 trillion every 2 years, trust me, but it will require $1 trillion or thereabouts year after year for 10 to 15 years. If that kind of money is available, then we can talk of any partnership. Then we can show that this can work.
Thank you, Surya. Anna, if you have complementary questions, you are more than welcome.
And you can always email me and I'll be happy to answer whichever question you have to the best of my ability. I'm not the last word on this, by the way.
Now we are going to Yelizaveta Badanova. Surya, which international actors are most comfortable for India to lend from? The World Bank or global environmental funds?
Yeah, you see, again, let me tell you, the size of these funds that you're talking, as I said, the World Bank's total lending was only 67 billion. World Environment Fund even less than, which is part of that's managed by the same group, is far, far less. I think it's in not even $1 billion last year, if I recall correctly. But I may be wrong on that. So what in my view is needed is really a realistic dialogue on what the funding needs are. Either McKinsey is all wrong, or if McKinsey is right, then the funding needs are way out of line with what these institutions are providing. I'm not running down these institutions, but that's what they are doing today. I'm not saying that they can't do more, but you have to put this in perspective. So unless the rich governments who bear the responsibility, as you know, there's a paper out there produced by 200 Western think tanks, and not me, or Indian think tanks, which put 41% of the responsibility for global warming on one single country, and I don't want to name that country, and then about 32% on a union, which I will also not name. So unless these people who are responsible truly undertake that, look, this is a problem we are going to solve, World Bank and others will keep tinkering at the edges, is all I can say.
Anybody else from the audience willing to ask question? You go to the Q&A box. Anybody? Anna is back. Thank you, Ella. Anna is back. Ministerial meetings of the TTC will take place at least once a year, with the venue alternating between the EU and India. The first EU-India ministerial meeting is planned to be held in spring 2023. And then, no question, it's a remark. TTC means Trade and Technology Council. So do you think, Surya, that India can make a kind intellectual pressure on EU, showing that EU has to take more responsibilities regarding the Western support to the transition, not the political support, but the concrete material financial support.
Again, Anna, in my country, they retire you at 60 years of age, and I was 50 years ago. So I'm no longer going to be sitting in these TTC meetings, but there were similar meetings when I was in the government. And I would say that more than India convincing them, you can look at Stockholm Economic Institute. You can look at Eco-Equity. These are Western think tanks who are these numbers. I'm not producing these numbers. These are their numbers. I'm not saying that, and they are telling them what their responsibility is. So, I don't think there is a lack of data or lack of understanding of this responsibility. What is missing, still missing, is this whole concept. And while I say this, let me give you another example. And I've said this in a UNFCCC conference many years ago when I was leading India. At that time, total Indian emissions were about 3.5–4% of the global emissions. And I offered that, look, every Indian will stand behind me and I'll be the first one in the queue to jump into the nearest ocean or sink India completely. And I said that that will solve 3.5% of the global emission problem. But at that time, the talk was that emissions must come down by 60% by 2050 or some such number. So I said, if you give me the solution for the balance 56.5%, then my sacrifice would be worth it. But if you don't give me the solution for the balance 56.5%, my sacrifice is not worth it. So, its problem is as stark as that. And all this assuming that the IPCC is telling us right. I'm not a climate scientist. So I'm assuming that the IPCC knows something and they're telling us the right thing. If IPCC is taking us up a garden path, then all my arguments fall by the wayside. But I'm assuming that IPCC is right and IPCC is correct about the abrupt events or the climate events that could happen if we lose the 1.5 degree threshold and if we lose the 2 degree threshold. So assuming that that is true, the answer is not in having more meetings. The answer is really in acting on what information and data we already have. And this information data is produced by European, American, or rather I would say OECD think tanks. I'm not the one producing this data.
Thank you. We are going now slowly, but with effective manner to the end. I will give you 1 minute each, 1 minute Miguel, 1 minute Kavita, 1 minute Surya. Miguel, 1 minute, beep, beep.
Gracias. I'm not sure the volume of money is what is going to change this in terms of politics and the like. And but there's a point I want to make in the 30 seconds I have, which is that the investment in technology might change the structure of the country. So maybe a solution is investing in innovation, in industrial policy could be a solution in this.
So Miguel
Now I
is
shut
like
up.
Miguel is like me. Miguel is a dreamer, and we think that something will happen, new, unexpected, changing everything.
I'm sorry.
Kavita,
I'm sorry being like you.
Kavita, you are not like me.
There are two things that I'd like to say. The first is on this comment about innovation. Given the uncertainty of innovation, we would all like, and I believe that India should invest in innovation, because unless you can make a market for yourself out there on products that you can sell to the world in the technology space, you're not really going very far. But it doesn't answer the 15-year question. So your solutions might be 30 years out there. So that is a challenge. The second point I thought I should make is about just transition. I heard a mention about just transition and how India going to focus on that. And I think for countries like India, just transition is a queer concept because we continue to have reasonably high levels of unemployment. We are struggling to provide jobs to the youth entering the workforce. And so trying to find one group of people who need to be protected in this process of climate transition, I don't think really makes economic or political sense. So we need to be just for the whole economy and not just for the sectors which will get affected. So that's my limited 2 cents. Thank you.
Mucho gracias.
Many thanks, Kavita. Surya.
So I'll say mucho gracias.
Right. Very well said.
Okay, so, very quickly, let me just say that money talks. And, innovation is a great thing. I have nothing against innovation, but Kavita rightly pointed out that we are running against time as per IPCC. Maybe it will happen, maybe it will not happen. So are we willing to take that risk or try something else? That is the question too. And I completely agree with Kavita that a just transition, and that is should be economy-wide. I mean, people don't realize that, but 90% of Indians are living under some level of poverty by any global construct. So you can't have a just transition without looking at the entire economy. So thank you.
To you, Surya. Then, ladies and gentlemen, I will oversimplify the issue. India has a population 3 times bigger than European Union, and the wealth per head is 20 times lower. How could we expect that a block of humans being 3 times bigger than us will make the same choices and the same economic investment like us, being 20 times less rich or less wealthy, if you want, for forgetting rich, less wealthy? How is it possible? So how is it possible that we can say to India, do your homework? Europe, we are first or second richest region in the world, second after the US. How can we say to Indians, do your homework? They do their homework, but they do what they can, and they do what they need. And they still need to develop more to find new ways of growing inside the country. This said, I haven't said much. I'm sure that you will hear us again about India, because I think that we, the Europeans, but more globally the Westerners, we have to take more and more interest into India. Roughly, it is 1/5 of humanity, and we have to understand what they do, what they want, what are their own challenges and targets, and to see how we can do things together and why. This said, I will, of course, deeply thank Surya. I get to know him much better. I am in India since 3 weeks. I am happy having a new friend, and having a friend understanding and knowing many, many things that I do not know, and teaching me things that I do not understand, but I assume that step by step, I will start to understand. I do thank Kavita for her participation and remarks, and Miguel for being so Westerner like me, that he has roughly the same attitude, and forgetting
or not understanding anything, no?
and forgetting that Miguel is also Latin American, so he may have a different way of looking at things. And my dear team, it's not my team, by the way, it's the team of Shweta, but the dear team of Delhi, this fantastic young woman full of enthusiasm and able to push everybody on earth, including Surya. This said, excellent afternoon to the Westerners and good evening to us, because we, in India, we are at 7:30 p.m. It's time to think about the soup and what to put in it.
I'm super happy to see Sweta. Very happy to meet each other, but I miss Sweta. And you, Jean-Michel.
Everybody I know in this world misses Shweta. I don't know what's about it.
Hallelujah and hallelujah. Shweta, a word?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And for the kind support that the global team gets. We will definitely pick your brain more, Miguel. Stay tuned. Now we have a team who can chase you. So we will get in touch.
No, I will not be tuned, but I miss you.
Yes.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good luck to India.
Thank you, everybody.